I find my choices in my work has to come with the respect of who I'm portraying. So when I did Wind Talkers with Nick Cage, they're like, oh, Adam, we'd love for you to come and read for this role. We think you'd be great. I told them they have to ask permission from the Navajo Nation before I can even come in the room. They thought I was crazy.
That's funny.
They're like, what?
If you look at Native representation in history, it's been pretty bad. So almost showing any truthful, real version of Native people is humanizing. I think anytime we show Native people kind of on their terms and in their environments, we're humanizing them on the screen, and we're changing the narrative that history is kind of laid on us. History and Hollywood. Seminole and Creek filmmaker Sterling Harjo in a 2020 interview. It's a well-trod and blood-bespoken truth that Native American and Indigenous people have been and continue to be one of the most marginalized minorities in America. An all the more haunting fact when one considers that, as the implied title suggests, they are native to the land that continues to marginalize them. Cinema has been no exception in the treatment of Native Americans, their treatment fitting historically into the picture of America as a whole. This by no means indicates their absence in the history of cinema, which spent much of its infancy and early maturation depicting them as villainous and often rampaging beasts of the untamed world, often in Western films. Scholar Julia Boyd acknowledges, in much the same manner that American colonists forced Indians off their native land, filmmakers have often relegated Native American characters to roles wherein they have been typecast as minor characters displaying stereotypical, historically inaccurate behavior. The stereotypical Native American of the early Western film is often a one-dimensional warrior, riding in for warfare on a horse covered in feathers and war paint. Nameless and faceless, these characters often die en masse and with little distinguishing features from one to the next. The homogeneity of the Native American in cinema is all the more shocking when one considers, as Boyd does, that, quote, the American government recognizes 562 Indian tribes, and while 229 of them are based in Alaska, the rest are located in 33 other states. With each of these tribes come distinctly different traditions and histories that cannot be generalized, but are repeatedly compressed to one ambiguous culture for the purposes of film. The characterization of the Native and Indigenous person is often regressive, hurtful, and historically just plain wrong. This idea of the Native American as represented in early cinema originated with American literature, going back as far as the 16th century. Jacqueline Kilpatrick, author of Celluloid Indians, credits author James Fenimore Cooper as the primary creator of the stereotypes of the noble savage, as well as the bloodthirsty savage. The latter a brutal animal not above kidnapping children and raping women. The former a wise, otherworldly stoic at peace with nature. Yeah, we've all seen it.
Moccasin, tread softly. You are at an age to choose, to decide whether you wish to become a warrior of the tribe or return to your people, the pale-faced ones.
These are my people.
Dan Georgiaka's essay, They Have Not Spoken, emphasizes that while the noble savage may seem a bit brighter than his bloodthirsty counterpart, it, quote, tells the audience nothing about real Native American culture. One of the earliest depictions of Native Americans in cinema was all the way back in 1894 in a Thomas Edison kinetoscope film. Edison's kinetoscope films first debuted on Broadway on April 14, 1894. A patron would fork over 25 cents for 5 films and then watch the films unreel through a peephole. One can only guess at the excitement these early viewers underwent. For the first time, not only motion was captured, but they were able to see sights that may have otherwise never have been able to witness. As demand grew, more content was added. Luckily for Edison and Company, Buffalo Bill's Wild West and Congress of Rough Riders had also just made a home in Brooklyn. Among the acts featured in Buffalo Bill's Wild West shows were reenactments of historical events of the Wild West and hunting customs of the Native Americans. Yeah, you can imagine how all that went. In one of these early pictures, Lakota Indians from Buffalo Bill's Wild West show reenact the ghost dance. Even in this, the earliest stages of cinema, the contention between natives and whites began. After the film was shot, the New York Herald ran an article titled Red Men Again Conquered, in which the author writes the kinetoscope displayed to the red men the power and supremacy of the white man in the capturing of their image for consumerism. The article goes on to illustrate the native as a hapless fellow in awe of the ever-impressive technology of Edison's Black Maria Studios. Ralph and Natasha Fryer would later write that this first film began the, quote, cultural genocide of the Native American and the beginnings of the creation of the famed Hollywood Indian. I roll here. The kinetoscope picture portrayed a warlike dance out of any random context and with no sound. Thus, the native would begin his place in cinema history, silent and unable to use his own voice. In 1914, D.W. Griffith's feature The Battle of Elderbush depicted an innocent family being tormented by Indians. The family remains trapped in a house until the cavalry ride to the rescue. This early picture lays down the template for the Native American depiction in pictures. They are the, quote, other, an alien threat, something to be tamed or conquered as the heroic white frontiersmen made their life in this hard new land. Ugh. As film essayist Chris Dashiell notes, taking into account the cumulative effect on viewers of hundreds of westerns throughout the decades, the average person would think that Indians were constantly attacking the whites in force. The real story of forced relocations and massacres of native people went untold. Interestingly, the first feature-length film made in Hollywood, 1914's The Squaw Man, Cecil B. DeMille, toyed with this guilt of what's been done to the Native American. The Native woman in the film saves her white hero's life twice, bears his child, and still ends up a victim in the film's narrative. Yet even here, as earlier noted, we do not see a real character with feelings and personality, no, but simply this projection of white guilt laid on the screen by white filmmakers for white audiences. Sadly, this dynamic of white conflict at the center of the American nation would, for much of cinema's first century, be the true theme of most nuanced and compassionate portrayals of Native and Indigenous people. That great early pioneer of American cinema, John Ford, who spent a good deal of his celluloid destroying Indians, nearly always Plains Indians regardless of where the film be set, often Monument Valley, only Plains Indians ever lived in teepees, became contemplative in his later films, namely the brilliant and deeply flawed The Searchers and the sincere and apologetic Cheyenne Autumn. 1956's The Searchers tells the story of Confederate soldier Ethan Embry. Returning home defeated from the American Civil War, he spends the film searching for his niece, who has been abducted by the Comanche Indians, led by the brutal Scar. They find his niece, now one of Scar's wives, and she states that she wishes to remain with the Comanche.
These are my people. Hunchmea, go! Go, Martin, please!
Ethan makes it quite clear he would rather see his niece dead than living as an Indian. A bad fate is in store for Scar, who not only dies, but is scalped by Ethan. The climax of the film comes from the narrative tension of Ford leading the audience, and the characters, to believe that Ethan will kill the niece. However, in the film's finale, Ethan sweeps her up and returns her home.
Let's go home, Debbie.
Ethan, alone, leaves at the end in one of cinema's most famous shots. Critic Richard Corliss finds The Searchers to be a, quote, darkly profound study of obsession, racism, and heroic solitude. Roger Ebert notes, quote, I think Ford was trying, imperfectly, even nervously, to depict racism that justified genocide. Now, that's a quote. Glenn Frankel echoes this in his discussion of how Ford makes clear from the outset that Ethan is more interested in destroying the Comanches than he is in saving his niece. It's a good point. So, what does Ford say about all this? Well, in a 1964 Cosmopolitan interview, he's on record as stating, there's some merit to the charge that the Indian hasn't been portrayed accurately or fairly in the Western. But again, this charge has been a broad generalization and often unfair. The Indian didn't welcome the white man, and he wasn't diplomatic. If he has been treated unfairly by whites in films, that, unfortunately, was often the case in real life. There was much racial prejudice in the West. Wow, and there is racism in the film, make no mistake. The Indians are brutal and ruthless. However, film scholar Ed Lowry is quick to point out that, quote, never do we see the Indian commit atrocities more appalling than those perpetrated by the white man. Interesting. While The Searchers takes care for the viewer to somehow, against all odds feel for Ethan, his alter ego, doppelganger, Scar, is still the dark other, even as his motivations may be eerily similar.
2 sons killed by white men. For each son, I take many scalps.
Randy Roberts and James Olsen write that Ethan Edwards is also an obsessed maniac. White settlers are not simply the advanced vanguard of civilization, they are racists. Indians are not just noble savages, they are savage killers. The frontier is not a place of opportunity, it is a wasteland. In the character of Ethan Edwards, John Wayne had extended the Western hero to the border of evil. At the end of the day, this perhaps best encompasses Ford's intention with The Searchers, a film about a hard land and hard times where hate and fear naturally breed hate and racism. And perhaps the best one can hope for is to accept the now tainted niece and walk away alone. That is as long as one is male, of course. There is little hope to be found here for women, and perhaps not at all for Native women. In a, quote, comedic subplot of the picture, a Native woman known as Look is accidentally purchased alongside with a blanket. She's routinely mistreated and later in the picture found dead and discarded, to no one's surprise and with little fanfare. So, in the end, The Searchers is the white man again coping with what he has wrought when he entered the natives' land. In 1964, Ford would helm Cheyenne Autumn. It would be Ford's last Western. He proclaimed it as an elegy for the Native Americans abused by the US government, and originally envisioned it as a docudrama in which Native and Indigenous actors would be cast. This was soon dropped, and actors such as Sal Mineo, Ricardo Montalban, and Gilbert Rowland would take lead Native roles. Ford was able to utilize Navajo people to portray some of the Cheyenne. Michael Rear notes that the Navajo actors spoke Navajo, oftentimes using crude language having nothing to do with the film's narrative. This was an important moment in the development of Native Americans' identity, because they were able to mock Hollywood's historical interpretation of the American West. For Ford, though, it was his amends for the stereotype he had spent years honing and crafting. However, much like The Searchers, for all of Ford's sincerity with Cheyenne Autumn in his attempt to better portray Native Americans, the film serves more as a dialogue of the growing American conscience at the wrongs white men did, rather than as an insightful work into the Native and Indigenous culture and people. Even in an outlier of a film such as 1970's Little Big Man, where the Cheyenne tribe was portrayed as a cooperative society and were contrasted with the white people who struggle to survive and are seen as more savage, it would be noted that the lead character is, of course, a white man.
Got to cut your throat to get it through your head. I'm a white man.
White? Sure, I'm white.
And this was how much of the Native and Indigenous story goes in cinema. White men oversaw cinema and used it to their ends and purposes. For instance, Robert Flaherty's 1922 Nanook of the North was sold as a purported documentary of the Inuk, but was really mostly constructed by Flaherty and crew. It would be in documentaries that Native and Indigenous voices would first be allowed to take charge of their own narrative, however. Poet and filmmaker Sandra Osawa, a member of the Makah Nation of Washington State, would be one of the first Native Americans to create a TV series when she wrote, produced, and directed the series Native America, beginning in 1974. The series focused its lens primarily on Native American issues. While the program was given the unpopular time slot of 6:30 a.m. on NBC, it garnered a following while it interviewed both Native guests and others, such as Marlon Brando, who were concerned with Native issues. Osawa would go on to form Upstream Productions in 1980, where she would make In the Heart of Big Mountain and Lighting the Seventh Fire, among others. Her Usual and Accustomed Places played at the Sundance Film Festival in 1997. These films were pivotal in creating, quote, truthful and multifaceted stories that allowed Native Americans in film to not be defined solely by a stereotype or their racial identity, but rather to represent a complete experience of a human being who has lived within that culture, says Boyd. Over in Canada, Abenaki filmmaker Alanis Abomsawan began making documentaries in 1960, such as Kanesatake, 270 Years of Resistance, in 1993, which deals with the 1990 land dispute in Oka, Quebec between a group of Mohawks and the town. She states the main purpose of her work is for our people to have a voice. No matter what we're talking about, whether it has to do with having our existence recognized or whether it has to do with speaking about our values, it's okay to be an Indian. Documentaries were essential for the propagation of Native and Indigenous culture and identity. Next up came the narrative features. In 1998, a feature written by Sherman Alexie and directed by Chris Eyre, Smoke Signals, was a breakout hit at the Sundance Film Festival. It is often cited as the first feature film to be written, directed, acted, and co-produced by Native Americans.
It's a good day to be Indigenous. It's 45 degrees in the sun. It's 8 a.m. Indian time in 1998.
While celebrated as a film in its own right, in an essay, Amanda Cobb also declares the film, quote, an achievement because it exists at all. Smoke Signals spoke to Native and non-Native audiences alike with its themes of identity and familial relationships. It's not free of stereotypes, however, featuring issues of alcoholism, which drew some criticism for its negative impact towards Native American culture. Nonetheless, the impact of Smoke Signals is profound. One of the allies of Native American cinema has consistently been the Sundance Film Festival, where Smoke Signals originally premiered. The creation of the Sundance Institute's Native American and Indigenous program has for nearly 3 decades supported Native filmmaking both creatively and financially. Sundance founder Robert Redford has said, Native American and Indigenous filmmakers are rooted in a long and deep tradition of storytelling, referencing Native culture's oral and visual traditions of storytelling that have been passed down from generation to generation. Since its inception, the Sundance program has only been led by Native American filmmakers. And the Sundance Film Festival has not been the only such venue. The American Indian Film Festival has existed since 1975. Given the dearth of Native-led filmmaking, the festival often showed and awarded films which dealt with Native American issues, themes, or featured Native American actors. Post-Smoke Signals, more Native lens films began to show up, such as Zacharias Canuck's Entanajruat, The Fast Runner, and Randy Redford's The Doughboy in 2001, Sherman Alexie's The Business of Fancy Dancing in 2002, and Georgina Lightning's Older Than America in 2008, just to name a few. 16 years after Smoke Signals, a film called Drunktown's Finest bowed at Sundance to mixed reviews. Directed by Native American and transgender filmmaker Sidney Freeland, the film is notable for being a relatable humanistic tale that happens to be told with Native American characters. Redford stood by any criticism lobbed at the movie, criticism ranging from poor acting to complicated plotting, stating, "It's a tough movie, but it's a tough life." I guess that's going to be my response to anything from now on. The film is remarkable for daring to take on complex tales from a Native American perspective, though. Sidney Freeland has since gone on to direct episodes of the FX series Reservation Dogs, a series created by Sterling Harjo and Taika Waititi. It's the first series featuring all Indigenous writers and directors, and a nearly all Indigenous cast and crew. The show was a success and was picked up and renewed for 3 seasons. Native American artists have come a long way, but their voice is still severely underrepresented.
Being a warrior, it's not always easy. You and your thuggy-ass friends, what are you doing for your people? It's easy to be bad. It's hard to be a warrior with dignity.
Whereas in the Western film's heyday, a Native American lead would often be portrayed by a white actor such as Rock Hudson, Hollywood is now witness to several successful leading Native actors, such as Adam Beach or Wes Studi, a Cherokee Nation actor and film producer.
I've done a lot of work in terms of different Native languages over the years, and being bilingual has made this something that I can be a little more comfortable with, in that then my mind is at the point that I'm not going to feel embarrassed if somebody laughs at the mistakes I make.
Featured in such films as Dances with Wolves and The Last of the Mohicans, Studi received an honorary academic award in 2019, making him the first Native American filmmaker to be honored. He's also the second Indigenous artist from North America ever to be honored by the Academy, the first being Buffy Sainte-Marie, the Canadian songwriter who earned an Academy Award in 1983 for her song Up Where We Belong, from the film An Officer and a Gentleman. Not only this, but he ranked 19th in New York Times' 2020 list of the 25 greatest actors of the 21st century. So yeah, not too shabby. Organizations have also cropped up to assist in the creation of Native and Indigenous art. Vision Maker Media, the Neotero Storytelling Fellowship, Native American Media Alliance Program, and Illuminative seek out to fund and create works from Native and Indigenous artists. Native and Indigenous filmmakers have also found their voices ready to be listened to in recent years. Dennis Goulet's 2021 Night Raiders is a post-apocalyptic sci-fi picture. Tracy Deer's 2020 Beans tells the tale of a 12-year-old Mohawk girl, and Jesse Anthony's Brother I Cry deals with addiction. This is just to name a few of these excellent highlights. This work is important and must continue, not only to provide Native Americans a platform for storytelling, but also, of course, to assist in the erasure of the negative and false image cinema has so long fostered. In Emelise Marubio's and Eric L. Buffalohead's book, Native Americans on Film, Conversations, Teaching, and Theory, they write, quote, "Because the power of first cinema drives the film market, imbuing viewers with perceptions of what Native film should look like, the need to refuse stereotypical representations of Native peoples still exists in North America. Therefore, it must be Native Americans themselves that are the key to changing this narrative and directing the future of their voice in storytelling. More opportunities are arising, but it's still very much an uphill battle." In an open letter from the WGA West in 2020, it was brought to light that Hollywood still has a widespread practice of hiring, quote, cultural consultants for their projects instead of just hiring creators from the community. How insulting is that? As Native Americans demand a say in telling their own stories, it's still a cinema in its infancy, and these voices, so long silenced, are sure to provide exciting cinema in the future.
The specificity of the culture really kind of draws people in.
Aho! Young warrior! Looks as though you've tasted the white man's lead.
But then they get hit with very universal themes.
It's only paintballs.
Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe and hit that like button.